shelling out money, anything, ayy. Ooh, got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when I'm get to the bag, ayy. Got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast, ayy. Ayy, let them all cross. If they hate, then let them hate and make a bigger boss, ayy.
This episode is brought to you by SPI Logistics, the premier freight agent logistics firm in North America. For over 40 years, SPI has been diligently building the most successful freight agent network to provide first-class relationships for our shippers, receivers, and carrier partners. We are more than another transportation network. We are a dedicated team of professionals united by one singular purpose, and that is to expedite our agents' success. All of our agents are set up for success on day one, as they are provided with a full suite of support staff that is ready to assist them with everything from after-hours emergencies to financial and administrative needs on a no-fee basis. This way, you can focus on continuing to grow your business. There is no financial risk to start, and you have the ability to earn up to 75% in commissions. If you are looking to take control of your financial future and build your business with the backing of one of the most successful logistics firms in North America, visit www.spi3pl.com to learn more. Do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. That is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I do say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak with transportation professionals, because at the end of the day, you guys, I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve, so you can take this information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. I'm going to jump right in, you guys. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And this guy who's joining me today is one of my favorite individuals out there, because as we both like to say, we're saying the exact same message. We just start at different areas and we always arrive at the exact same conclusion. So with that being said, I have my good friend, Mr. Jim Kenny, back on the show today. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to join me to talk about a topic we are both very passionate about.
Chris, thanks for having me, and I love the intro. We have some of the best discussions, and we almost always get back to the exact same place. So I am really pumped up about sales integration discussions. So where would you like to start, buddy?
No, I think we'll start with kind of something that internally we're going through right now inside of my brokerage, and it's like we have our ideal customer profile. We know where the direction that we're going, but I still felt that we are casting too wide of the net in trying to get after who we're trying to prospect. Because, ultimately, the more and more I think about it, my business has a great core group of customers, but we want to grow and scale, and we need another level of shipper to get there. And I've worked with them in my career, so it's the ones that go between that 250 to 750 annual full truckloads, that those are the ones that I need to start targeting for that consistency aspect of things.
Well, I'm gonna remember how we start from different spaces, and you always tease me and say, Jim, I will ram my head against the brick wall 25 times if I have to. And I said, that's because your strategy, there's gold on the other side, versus the guys who hit their head against the brick wall 1,000 times and they didn't think about what's on the other side or how to get there. So I'll tease aside. There's been a lot of major research in the last 6 to 8 months on blogs. And if you look at McKinsey, for example, Bain, BCG, a lot of the big consulting groups, Salesforce integration is a big deal in a nice fancy way. You and I call it that. And the modern thing is, well, what's your tech stack? And it really, if you're talking about sales tech stack, and I haven't forgot your question at all, it really comes down to 3 things. Okay, you have predictive analytics, okay, which is basically, that's the robot algorithms that help you forecast your sales with greater accuracy. Okay, and that's great. If you're a big firm, you can't not be doing this. Okay, but remember, thousands of firms aren't there yet, and that's fine. Number 2, it's just generative AI for productivity. And those are tools that really help make you more efficient. And we can't ignore those. And then finally, it's what I call conversational intelligence, or the industry calls CI. And that's basically tools that record and analyze and make your calls better. So if we break each of those down, back to what you're saying is, your problem still can't be solved by AI. You're looking at, what is my best target market? Then you break that target market down to your niche, and then everybody's really cool. I was teasing Mike Riccio not too long ago about everybody's ideal customer profile. I said, yeah, us old guys in marketing, we call those niches. Okay? So really what you're doing is something that an AI system doesn't do. What AI systems really do on the sales integration side are, and where they're most valuable, I cannot tell you how amazing this stuff is their predictive analytics, their productivity or their efficiency tools, and their CI or their conversation intelligence. But before that, Chris, what you're saying is, as a business owner, as that brokerage owner, you know, because you see it in your data. So you can throw that data into there and you can get all the analytics you want and it will tell you, but you're working the business. So what I try to tell people is, okay, before you use any of this stuff, and I pulled this from your notes, Chris, from our April's, when you're up there, you said, guys, I'm telling you, I love this, but you're the one who knows where your business wants to go. You're still setting the strategy as the owner. You're still saying, this is the markets I want to go after. So before you move that first load or you really get going, you got to know, where do we excel or what do we want to do? So if you don't know what your niche or, ideal customer profile is, you're in big trouble. So now go back to your question, what you're talking, that I've rambled all that academic geeky stuff. For your business, we need to be 250 minimum, 750. Here's how we grow and scale within our business. So now, if you want to use those tools, that's great. But prior to that, okay, you got to do it on your own. And I'm struggling when I ask somebody, well, what is it? How many times have you heard this in your coaching career? So I'm going to ask you a question. How many times have you said, all right, let's figure out what you do best. What do you want to do? Oh, I move freight. I can move anything. How do you feel when you hear that, Chris?
I feel like it's a company that's lacking direction. To be honest with you, Jim, because I understand the philosophy behind that, because back in the day, that was the way it was, right? Hey, we're going to go after anything and everything that's out there. And I think 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was a winning strategy. But I feel like when you drop a bunch of technology and data and information out there in today's market, and this is where I think a very large threat is to a lot of companies out there that they can't even see on their roadmap is people are getting more and more refined in how they want to onboard providers. And that spray and pray methodology now goes back to an emotional connection of COVID, when those people were like, hey, we can do everything. And then all that freight was there sitting on the docks, and all these shippers are like, I thought you said you could do this. What's going on?
Right. So the same thing. But if somebody says, hey, Jim, okay, we excel, okay, at freight management. That is our differentiating tactic. So if you're a $4, $3, $5, $7 million broker or an $800 million broker, if you know what your differentiation point is, knowing that then leads moving to all this other cool stuff. But if you go to chase the cool stuff and you still have an unbelievably unorganized set of target markets, and you say, well, the system will help find that. But if your guys are continually chasing everything, then your systems are never going to find and identify and take advantage. So your predictive analytics doesn't work. So let's flip it. Somebody comes to me, just had this discussion, and they wanted to expand. I'm like, you guys look at your freight breakdown, okay? 67% of your business is a reefer, okay? Why aren't you dropping your LTL dry offering? Why aren't you doing, and they're like, no, we're making money there. I said, X amount of capital expenses going into this and you're getting Y. And then it dawned on them. I said, why aren't you chasing, okay, the trade associations, the groups that do refrigerated freight in your target market? And don't be going after firms this size because you're not large enough, and don't go after this size. It's the exact same thing. You can slice that, then use your predictive analytics, the generative AI. And by the way, not that I discount those tools. Hey, for your viewers, here's something everybody should watch. It's a boring interview. It's not real engaging, but if you can get through about 25 minutes, go to YouTube and Google Eric Schmidt interview. He's a former CEO of Google, and he talks about how people underestimate AI this time. And it is so clear, and you've actually touched on a couple of the points today. And he does point out, unless you're very clear about what you want it to do and help you, you're still going to struggle, which is one of the biggest things about AI. We're not getting the efficiency we want.
Yeah.
Did you go through the implementation steps appropriately? And the answer is almost always what they talk about is no. But can the tools do it if you do it right? The answer is yes. And so,
yeah, I mean, Jim, I talk about this often. You can have all the technology in the world, but if you have shitty processes, you just have now automated your shitty processes. Is all it boils down to. And it's like I look at it is we've been in an interesting time here in the industry because there's a lot of great technology that's being released out there, but I feel like there's more FOMO out there than anything, because the majority of the conversations that I have, and again, I say this often, the beauty of why people listen to the show is I'm doing the job that they do, right? Like, I'm not a former anything. I am a guy who's in the trenches building up their business, and I have yet to meet a shipper or a prospect who's hit me with, I need your tech stack before we can go any further. Like that's an afterthought for most people.
Okay, so let me help you out here. You said you don't know that. I'm going to read you something real quick that I pulled from a blog. It's McKinsey & Company, big consulting company, and there's some research data. And they're basically talked about, here are the 7 steps, okay, to sales integration, or this tech stack. Number 1, okay, the discovery and strategic planning. Okay, that has to take place without your tech stack. Okay, and part of that is, okay, you have to know what your market is and what you're doing, right? Surprise, surprise. Okay. Number 2, okay, data preparation and migration from your existing stuff into there. So if you haven't clarified what your market is, you're just, what they point out is, you're just moving, okay, your garbage from an antiquated system. And a bigger problem, just what you said, Chris, is now you're putting very unclear data or records into a high-tech system, which is just going to accelerate the confusion and the chaos. So when you say that, again, coming from the 2 different directions that we talk about, there's evidence. So the 3rd step that they talk about on this is so fun. Clarifying everybody's role in that process and seeing who's going to do it. And so all 3 of those are done before that tech stack gets going.
Yeah.
The first one is we use different words, but the funny thing is we get the same way. So as a thought to me, you will be integrating technology. You cannot pursue in the future without it. So
correct.
Everybody go watch Schmidt. Okay. But if you do not have a very clear plan of what your firm's strategic differentiating variable is, okay, you're just automating chaos under an old, less automated system. So that's not really a good strategy for success, is it, Chris? That's just creating hell. So
yeah. No, I agree with that, Jim. And so it's like we're talking about structure, we're talking about processes. What is something that most organizations that because like, for the audience out there who doesn't know, not only is Jim a longtime professor out there, he's also a longtime highly sought after consultant inside of the transportation space. And he works with companies nonstop about what we're talking about here, you guys. And that's developing a sales system, because at the end of the day, I feel like most organizations, and I'm guilty of this, right? Like, I want to be abundantly clear, you guys, when I speak and I say people or most organizations, I will always put mine at the front of the list here, because I've made this mistake where you are just more chasing revenue than in any revenue at all costs. And naturally that comes from when you start with nothing and you have no customers, you're so desperate to get customers. And then once you get customers, you keep that strategy going, and then you start spinning your wheels. So from my seat, Jim, what is something that most organizations miss in like actually developing a scalable process?
Okay, so the first one, we've already talked about it twice, okay? And I just completed this project for somebody, guys. So here's an example, okay? We looked at it and I said, we're going to narrow this down, okay? Where is our greatest revenue? So we just looked at the data like anybody else would did our own analytics, okay? So 67% comes from reefer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Truckload, LTL, and some warehousing work, okay? So you put that together and you say, all right, how big is that market? Okay. So I'll make up these numbers here for professional. Yeah. Let's say that this firm's doing $100 million, so we can round the numbers, all right? Of that 165 they're doing, okay? So we're going to keep the 65 because we like that revenue, okay? But every application of technology is going to only include that 100 million, okay? So we automated digitally at this point our communications at 60, 30, 15, and 5 days before trade shows, but only to that reefer freight business, okay? Second, okay, we took the data and we made sure that they were doing at least 50 million in revenue, okay, and less than 750 million. We knew where the sweet spot was because of 67%. So again, the front end work of just what you said, okay, who are my best pieces? So there's guys, well, there's more than that. I'm like, all right, so let's think about this, okay? At what point do you dominate an industry? Well, what do you mean? I said, you're doing $100 million or frozen, okay? The industry, okay, is 37 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So 100 million divided by 37 billion means you're doing 0.00025. So you're doing 25 thousandths of 1%. Is this a discussion you really want to have with me? And there's your point, Chris, which we started the show about, your 250 to 750. Once you know that, okay, then we're disciplined to say, all right, we're automating, but only to this target market. So the second thing becomes, okay, not only do you do it, then you automate and be disciplined about it. We didn't automate the sales process. We automated the marketing process because that allowed us to reach a greater number of leads within that very defined set. And then the salespeople can now be disciplined. So you're cleaning up the leads, okay? Before that, they're just records. So if you really want to change something, okay, be disciplined about who you want as a customer. Second, be very disciplined and automate, okay, the communication processes to those folks. Okay, so this firm, do they need automatic dialers yet? Do they need, okay, bots to answer the phones and operations? They can certainly do that stuff. Okay, but the actual part of selling, okay, we automated, okay, our communication and outreach. Okay, we use AI on that for hitting the target market once we knew what it was. So if you're in your market, that the people you work with typically are much smaller, okay, then you say, well, where's my cost? Okay, so you go back to the P&L and it's labor. Okay, we don't want to use firm names, but let's say you use somebody who can automatically make your appointments that's probably a more valuable buy than a marketing or sales tech stack that might cost you $8,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know your target market, you've automated that communication, Chris. Your guys are hitting those with the phones and they know. Then let's save in the operations side, because your transaction cost, okay, you shipper pays you $3,000 for load. Okay, you pay the carrier $2,700. It thinks $300. Well, if your transaction cost is $185 per that trade versus 105 or 95, okay, you get the competitive advantage. So the last thing to really think about is maybe before, and I'm a marketing guy, and it's a big, maybe your automation might be in operations because you get a greater ROI. Did you see what I'm saying? So
100%.
because you and I are sales guys doesn't mean everything has to go to us. Sometimes it's just the efficiency of the whole business. So step back, okay, take your myopic view glasses and look at the whole elephant, not just the tail or the trunk or the gate. So those are the basic kind of things that you and I have talked about. In fact, when we presented in at our last CI meeting, but you to your audiences, you got to look at all aspects of the business when you talk about the tools of AI. And maybe, and I use that as an example, maybe that automated appointment scheduling software will get you a much greater return and a greater reduction of your transaction costs than automating something on the sales side.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I personally think, at least for a little bit of our strategy is we're going to automate as much operations as we possibly can. And that is where I don't ever want to automate the facing aspect of things. And, for me, it's like customer facing, carrier facing. I don't necessarily want to automate that yet. That could change, and again, all of my opinions, you guys, are fluid because they can change in time. I'm not set in stone. This is the way that we're going to always do this. But I feel like right now in the short term, operationally, you're talking about appointment setting, automating that. Like I will drop their name. I've had them on the show before. Q'd, Tom and them. They've been on the show before.
I love Tom and Prasad.
Yeah. And Jim, from my perspective, if you have that high volume shipper that requires multiple TMSs for the receivers to go in and schedule delivery appointments, that is a natural spot where that is a bottleneck because, again, looking internally, operationally, load building, other things like, we use Revenova for our TMS. They have a phenomenal load cloning option that comes along with it that helps us expedite that. But from our perspective, that still takes time, right? And it's like, I'm looking as when we're bootstrapping and trying to do dollar for dollar, where do we automate? Where do we want to implement AI? It's all operationally focused because that will take more time. And that time can be spent on revenue generating activities.
By the way, so the AI operations, I am not against bots at all. In fact, I love them. Okay. There's no reason in your operations team that if you're building and growing, you can't test, inbound calls, and they check on it. Your bot handles that. Okay. Will your bots be doing your outbound sales calls to your shippers? Probably not at this point, especially as a smaller firm. But the more you integrate along through the operations, so I see, again, the whole concept of predictive analytics, conversational, and there's some really cool stuff, and it moved faster than I thought. I'm a big believer in automating as possible. So let's look at some math, okay? So if you use things like, since we've dropped them, and it's clear on that, and you mentioned people, highway and queued and stuff, you do those kinds of things that help you. So if I'm an operations guy on the desk, okay, I can now move, 17 loads a day with automation versus 7.
Mm-hmm.
That's a gold mine. Therefore, my salespeople, if they have a clearly defined, where they've used analytics, and gone through, and then we know exactly where that target market is, and we're only communicating with that target market, and that's who gets into our database, then our salespeople are not wasting, and our marketing people are not wasting through automated systems, contacting leads that don't fit with our business. So the value comes from the operations side up, and then clearly, okay, automating through. So are there value in things with CRMs? And I said, absolutely. How could you operate your business today without a good CRM? I mean, that's just insane.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those kinds of things that you're absolutely correct. One of the things I really do like about when we talk about generative AI, okay, here's two ways to think about it. Okay, the positive is efficiency. The negatives we talked about is creating generic communication. Okay? But if you know exactly who your target markets are, your niche, and then your ICPs, and you're really very clear about states, lanes, locations, firm size, volume, all that kind of stuff, queue, codes, that once you have that, you automate the hell out of it. That's where the gold really takes place. So the automation then helps your reps have more productive calls because they're talking to more like-minded prospects. That's the gold. But if you don't do that beforehand, then you've just automated, like we talked about 7-8 minutes ago, you're just automating chaos. And that's never a good thing. Yeah, oh, we got a chaotic situation, Chris, so let's do this. Let's just make it faster and more chaotic. Yeah, that's always a good solution to growing a business, okay? But man, once you're clear on that, then automation takes out. So I do like conversational intelligence or CI tools to be tested on the operations side for inbound calls. Okay, that's a great place to start. Those tools keep getting better and better. I haven't seen anything that's just really got me doing handsprings on the outbound sales side. I have seen some good AI stuff on the outbound communication side in terms of automating systems. Okay, there's no doubt about that. And the predictive analytics of your system if you have the right database in your system. So, but again, those are human decisions before the automation decision, Chris.
Because it's like I hear you talking about a lot of this stuff out there, and like I look at like the overall freight broker market as a whole here, and we're talking, just there's like 27,000 active freight brokers that are out there. And if you look at it, the top 1,000 brokerages, which are like 3% of the market, contribute to like 90% of the revenue that is generated out there. So we're looking at 90% of the market.
It's higher. It's probably 95.
Okay. But so again, then we're looking at 95% of the active freight brokers out there generate $1 million or less a year as a whole. And
absolutely.
So we're at that point. And if you're in that situation, you got to go back and listen to what Jim's talking about here and compare it to what your daily outreach actually looks like. Because ultimately, and this is why it's not sexy. A lot of the topics I talk about are not sexy, you guys. It's not going to get a ton of engagement on social media because it's effective, though. Like, this is the stuff that I apply inside of my business. If you want to think behind the scenes, what goes through my head all day long, outside of how do I stay financially responsible to keep my business alive? Because when you bootstrap, you don't have a war chest of capital right away. You're trying to make it work. But number two is how do I become so productive with my time that if I'm going to make 40, 50, 60 calls a day, I'm calling the right 40, 50, 60 companies out there that fit inside of my ICP, as opposed to just casting a net and then getting in the air quote in the door with the shipper who adds you to a list. And then you find out you're bidding with 30 other brokers to move one full truckload in a week. And that's where you're consuming the majority of your time and your thought process, right? So it's like you can just become a little bit more refined with your daily operations to go deeper inside of who you're going after. Like, I feel like when you look at that, right? And like when most people see that, Jim, they're like, the top 1,000 or whatever, like 95% of the market. I look at that is where my greatest opportunity is for growth, because I know, and we can get deeper on this on a later episode, complacency, arrogance, all of those other things start to come in. But I feel like the majority of us out there, and when I say majority, I am putting myself at the front of the line. I got to become more refined, more targeted in who I'm going after, because
that's where you
got to get over the hump.
That's beautiful. Okay. If you're that disciplined, then the technology is gold.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly it.
Discipline that's missing to get there. Okay. So what we're really talking about is leveraging data and AI, okay, ensure user adoption. Leveraging data and AI, and that data comes from knowing that target market so well, that ICP, then you can accelerate the business. So those firms, those top 150, 200 firms, okay, that's what they're doing to grow. But they did what you already said, was they know who it is they want to chase. Okay? Very specific. And they're not chasing businesses that aren't doing 50 million or higher, 100. They don't want that. Okay. That automation is so expensive. They're chasing. Now what I see is enterprise. Okay. They're not going after it. If they're not getting 10,000 loads or more a year, I know a large number of firms, we're not even looking at that business. It's not in their ICP. Yeah. It's just not, Chris.
I mean, and just to think, you guys, what Jim said, the reefer market alone is $37 billion with a B dollars, and $100 million operation, which everyone would kill to have $100 million business, or even a 50 or a $20 million business. Like, I think the most insulting thing that I hear out there the most, Jim, is when people are like, oh, it's only a $10 million brokerage. Go build it then. Go build a $10 million brokerage and tell me it's only that. But again, it's like to kind of tie it all in there, man. Like you said, that is why you don't need to go out and chase endless leads that are out there, because $37 billion, like, even if you got it up to $1 billion, you're still at
that's not the whole market. I just gave you parts of that.
For sure.
Yes.
But I'm just trying to put that into context, Jim. Like, I feel like I'm talking against a brick wall when I try and tell people, like, you don't need to be as diverse as you think out there. Like, if you're just going to do full truckload, I get that. I can respect that. Like, hey, dry reefer, flatbed, full truckload, that's our jam. I can understand that. But if you're ultimately trying to build something and to really get in the wheelhouse of things, you don't need to offer much, is what I'm trying to get at. You need one core service offering.
And you need to do it really, really well.
For a very long time. Before you even start to get noticed by your customers, because picking up on time and delivering on time is your literal job. That's like giving McDonald's a high five because they made a hamburger, like, that's their core offering.
Absolutely. Chris.
Well, Jim,
wrap it up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like Brad said in the comments, man, we Jim and I could go for like 3 hours. And the thing is, you guys, if you guys want to hear more from Jim, reach out to him and connect, but he speaks at the TIA all the time. So if you guys are at Capital Ideas or stuff like that, Jim is constantly putting on stuff out there. So sign up for his stuff at his events. So, but other than that though, Jim, how does anybody reach out to you though directly?
Just go find me on LinkedIn. It's James Kinney, K-N-N-Y, and you can find me Professor Emeritus, which is a fancy name for retired professor, and work exclusively with 3PLs. And again, Chris, thanks for having me. I love when we get together, and I love doing programs with you at TIA and interviews. So as always, I look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Perfect. Appreciate it, Jim. Thank you so much. And I know you guys got value in this one. Make sure you subscribe and share the show, you guys. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And we'll be talking to you soon.
We're going to be talking about truth and hype, like what actually drives the freight market. Where are things? And this guy, there's nobody more qualified to talk about it than this guy. My good friend, Dean Croke with DAT, is back on the show. Dean, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Yeah, great to be with you. You've had a bevy of rock stars across your show in the last couple of years. I was just looking at the intro. It's good to be here.
It's been, I mean, Dean, this is your episode 1281.
Yeah.
Like, we're up, we're rocking. And I think, like, at this point, I could be wrong, but I think I have the longest running independent show in the industry at this point.
Yeah.
And you know, because we're over 5 years strong, and we're not slowing down, because you know, we need more of the right information kind of being out there, in my opinion. And you know, and especially by people who are in the seats, right? I think like in today's day and age with social media, it's very easy to position yourself as like a subject matter expert, because you can just like go on ChatGPT and get a couple of talking points and then create a bunch of content. But it's like, have you lived the life that you're talking about, or are you just posting about it? And you know, I think a great place to start is kind of like what you were just discussing backstage here with me. So like, what's been going on out there, man?
Yeah. Someone asked me the other day about data. I mean, I was in a software platform called Gemini this morning, and it's an AI platform. I asked it to tell me about the freight market, and I gave it some sample data. Chris, it straight up lied to me. And it told me about a lane from Jacksonville to Phoenix, and it said it was paying $5.05 a mile. And I said, what? And I said, are you sure? I said, Jacksonville to Phoenix, A, is not in the data, and $5.05 is not even the highest rate per mile in my spreadsheet. Where did you get that from? And it kind of went through this whole apology. And I said, are you making this up? We're having this discussion back with this AI model, and it kept apologizing. And I said, why are you lying to me? And it kept apologizing. And I had to tighten up my parameters and say, stop hallucinating and stop lying to me. And I think it's a question of garbage in, garbage out. In the end, I had to tighten up my parameters about what I was asking it to do. And I got to the right place in the end. But it comes down to context. If you don't know the market, the AI software will tell you whatever you want to know. Right. And my point was, you've really got to know the market. And I spend a lot of time out in the market. And by that, I mean, I have a Peterbilt truck, and I go to truck shows a lot.
Yep.
I spend a lot of time in truck stops and at truck shows. Last weekend, I was at the Big Iron Classic in Casson, Minnesota, with 450 owner operators. And so it's the first time I've been in a truck show without my truck. So I felt a little bit naked just walking around without my truck. It was the first time I'd been to a truck show without waking up in my truck.
Yeah.
Just a really weird experience. And but I was talking to these truckers about the market. And when you got 4 days with a bunch of owner operators, you learn a lot about the freight market, and you learn a lot about latent capacity, and you learn a lot about, you know, the velocity of capacity. You know, a lot of guys said, and this is not about the net capacity leaving the industry or entering the industry, like how many trucks are leaving or joining. It's about the speed of the capacity, because when things get quiet, it slows down.
Yep.
Right. And when things get busy, it speeds up. You don't necessarily add more trucks or lose more trucks. It just speeds up or slows down. You don't need to add more or lose more. So guys were saying, you know, instead of doing 2 loads a week, I'm now doing 1. But your net number of trucks hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And this is where you've got to get a really good feel for the market to understand what the data is telling you. Because when you look at the revocation data, what you see is the market is pretty flat from the number of trucks, the number of carrier authorities entering and leaving the market.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't tell you whether rates are going up or down. You can't infer that if capacity is leaving the industry at a higher rate, does that mean rates are going to go up? No, it just means carriers have slowed down to keep rates where they are. And that's what it dawned on me when I was watching all of these owner operators. I thought, and Chris, the majority of these 470 trucks were all loaded. In between loads. So you take out a couple of days to wash, shine, polish your truck, sit there for 4 days, leave Sunday. They've lost the best part of a week of productivity to go to this truck show. They would do this 4 or 5 times over the summer. And it takes a lot of time. Now, in busy years, they don't do this as much, but there are certain shows that these guys go to religiously. And that's that latent capacity that sort of, we talked about it on other shows. It dives in and out of the market when the opportunity's there.
Yeah.
That's what tends to flatten out spot rates. So that's one of the features of this market, is that carriers have tended to, I've said a lot that there's been a bigger cohort of carriers, because they made so much money during the pandemic, they can afford to take more time off. Because, Chris, all of these guys at this truck show, the vast majority own their own trucks.
Yep.
There's very little debt. Now, these are vast majority are pre-emission, pre-ELD.
Yeah.
right? They do all their own maintenance. These
Yep.
are skilled. These are the sort of guys you want under any load because they can do almost anything.
Yeah, these are the guys that have been like, because that's how my old man used to operate, right? Like
exactly.
he did all of his own maintenance on his own truck.
Yep.
He knew exactly what he was doing, like at all times. There was no guess, and it was that old school, professional, right? Like he was a professional truck driver, and it sounds like that's what a lot of those guys out there at that show were doing. And I think because I'm out here obviously building my freight brokerage, we're moving freight every single day of the week, and we look at it as like from our seat, we want to obviously I practice what I preach. We use the same trucking companies as much as we humanly possible can with our customers' freight, because I don't want to go out to a spot market or anything else and roll the dice, because customer relationships right now with brokers, I feel like, are as fragile as they've ever been.
Yeah.
And I don't want to roll the dice and risk putting somebody on my customer's load that isn't a trusted provider, right? And I know it takes time to build up to that, but I'm looking out there and I see a lot of the stuff, a lot of the data. I'm studying it. I study markets more than anything. And if I can see anything that is like a positive right now, is the consistency that's out there in regards to capacity and the pricing. And from me, it's like that is like that equilibrium that a lot of brokers need to get to, because like our customers pay us for consistency. They pay us to keep their rates the same, and then to hopefully get the exact same trucks coming in there time and time again.
Well, rates have been pretty much the same for the last 3 years. When I look at spot rates, right? So this is sort of spot rate territory. Even contract rates have been fairly flat when you look at new rates coming into routing guides on the contract side of our business, which is about 50 billion roughly in freight spend. They've been plus or minus 1% for the last year.
Yeah.
Even going back 2 years, you could argue they haven't moved up much. So shippers have certainly been having pricing power for a lot of that period of time. A lot of carriers have had to, keep their rates fairly flat to hold on to volume. Spot rates, though, have been, if you go back to the last 3 or 4 freight recessions, you sort of 2014, 15, 17, 18, 19, you saw these sort of plus or minus 20% year over year movement in spot rates. The pandemic, of course, was plus 35% up, 35% down. The last 12 months, Chris, has been barely plus or minus 1%. Up or down. So spot rates have been really flat for the last year. But when you go back and look at 23, 24, 25, they've barely budged. Like they're within a few pennies of each other. So it's been a really flat freight market. And I did a piece for the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and it was really shocking because I looked at, they were writing about California carriers, and I looked at spot rates before the pandemic. And I'll just talk about sort of long range averages here. And I know these are averages, but before the pandemic, average outbound California was $1.79. And then during the pandemic, it was the highest in the nation. The average during that sort of 2-year pandemic period to the end of 2022, it got up to $2.40, peaking at $3.70. That was the highest in the nation.
Yeah.
But that $2.40 average since the pandemic has dropped way back down. It's dropped 33% back to $1.79. So it's dropped back to pre-pandemic averages outbound California, but carrier costs have obviously gone up during that period. And so all of our costs. So I think that's the rub here, is that rates have sort of stabilized back to where they were, but everyone's costs have gone up. And I think that's where everyone's getting squeezed here.
So how is this balanced moving forward, right? Because I look at it is there's, and I know that not everybody out there agrees with this, but like what we're seeing right now, I think overall is a normal freight cycle minus a little bit of like holiday squeeze, because like in years past, around every major holiday, long weekends, capacity tends to tighten up. I haven't seen that, but I have seen a little bit of a drop in capacity around that times, not enough. But like I'm trying to explain to a lot of individuals out there, like what we're going through right now is a normal, like this is how the market normally is. Right. And I think that, just knowing how human beings are, Dean, a lot of people forgot 2017, 2018, 2019, or they never worked in the industry during that time. So they don't know what that was like. They only knew those boom times. that they experienced. And now, like what you said there, Dean, is the most accurate thing. Rates drop back down to where they, I don't want to say should be, but where they normally are. But costs, maintenance costs, everything else is increased. So that's where that squeeze is coming from. But I also look at it is how many of those owner operators that you were talking to last week, that stash cash like that, they all probably, I'm assuming, told you we've seen stuff like this happen before, maybe not to this extreme. That's why we do like we operate the way that we operate.
Yep. Yeah, this is there's a lot of seasonality, and they know that they've seen it before. They know that they can get by, and they control their costs, just like your father. They're very good at controlling their costs, doing their own maintenance. So I think they take a much longer term view to this, and they certainly don't panic, and they don't try and cut corners and haul bad paying loads. I think the one thing I noticed from these guys is consistency. Like they don't take risks and they don't cut corners. So where they might do 2 loads a week. One guy said to me, he said, I would normally do 2 combine harvesters in a season like this. I'm now doing 1 because the farmers aren't buying as many combines at the start of harvest season, which was not good for farmers. He said, I'm not going to go out and chase cheap freight with my RGN, which is really interesting because he could do that, but because it would blow his chances of getting that 1 load every, so they don't take the risks. And I think they'd take the pain of not taking that cheaper freight, that's the discipline. I think they're very disciplined when it comes to these soft markets.
And that right there, Dean, the way you described it is where I think a lot of brokers fail to understand that methodology, right? Because there's a lot of brokers who are like, why aren't you just taking my freight, right? Like I see posts, I would say at least 7 to 8 times a day, how somebody's complaining that a driver didn't take a load for 80 cents a mile or, $1.10 a mile or whatever that is. And then they'll screenshot like them saying it's not worth our time. And they're like, how is it not worth your time? What you're describing there is exactly it. And that is the difference, I think, between a lot of people who've ran dedicated customer freight before is like when you need to get back and you need to service them, it's service at all costs, right? Like they look at it is that's an investment in their business if they deadhead back empty. And especially if you're talking about guys with an RGN and stuff like that are at least $500 to $600 rolling down the freeway. Like they're not going to take something for $2 a mile. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Well, trucking isn't just about miles; it's about math.
Yeah.
Right. And part of the equation is since ELDs came in, it's about time. And what they're saying is it's not worth my time. The reality is that if you've only got 15 hours left on your 60, you've got to be very careful about how you choose that towards the end of the week, because it could put you in the wrong spot for your 34-hour reset. If that 34 is not at home, puts you in the wrong spot to start next week. Because if you're not in the right spot to start that load that you need for your prime contract, that spot load could actually cost you a lot more than the money that it generates. And that's the reality.
No, I agree. And so from your perspective, Dean, what is actually driving things to remain where they are for as long as they have, right? Like what? Because again, if a lot of people out there who listen to this show, they're on social media, everybody's got an opinion on this. And, it's either, the drivers don't know how to price their freight, or though the brokers are keeping, rates this low, the brokers are taking all the money. There's a bunch of, in my opinion, just a bunch of false narratives that's out there. So like what actually drives this in its simplest form?
I think I'll stand by this. We've been saying this for probably almost 2 years now. So this is not new news for anybody that follows Ken Adamo and myself, which is that the pandemic generated a cohort of smaller fleets and owner operators that made an excessive amount of profits. Remember, this was one of the most profitable periods in maybe carrier and broker history by a long shot. And the smart money paid off a lot of debt. So what we've got is this big spread in operating costs, because normally carrier operating costs traded in a fairly tight margin. Fuel, tires, filters, all were put in a pretty tight range. Remember, I'm someone that owns a truck, so I'm buying stuff all the time. The costs are fairly similar. But since the pandemic, we've got this big range. So if I said to you that it costs, $1.86 to run a truck in the spot market, I know that if you paid off your own truck, you can run for $1.45 today. Now, if rates are $1.70, I'm making a good profit and still paying myself $60,000 a year wage. So there's a cohort of carriers that can run and be profitable and pay a wage and make $34,000 to $40,000 a year and survive quite okay in this market. Now, I'd put to you that the carriers that have got a much lower level of debt is a much bigger cohort of carriers than we saw before the pandemic because of the profits they made during the pandemic. Now, the runway is getting shorter and shorter because if they own their own truck and trailer and they're not generating a serious amount of profit, that truck is aging. And if you're not getting a return on the capital that truck is involving, right, you start to get to a point where you trade down. If you're not generating enough profit, you can't trade up to a newer truck, right? So the economics start to work against you. I'm not saying they're at that point yet, but if you own your own truck and trailer and you have, let's say it costs you $1.50, you can run at spot rates all in the current market. If you're in our top 50 lanes, Chris, and our top 50 lanes are running at, $1.80, $1.90 a mile, you're actually doing really, really well today. So there's a wide range. But if you're a guy that's a guy or a girl that needs $2.12 a mile because you've got an aging, truck that's got a high mileage, you paid too much during the pandemic, you might need $2.12 a mile, and they're the ones that are really hurting. So for the first time, in the 25 years I've been here, we see this big spread in operating costs. So I think your bid strategy as a broker is really dependent on the debt levels of the carrier, which I know you don't get into when you're talking to the carrier because a truck's a truck. But I think there's a difference in bid strategy depending on the viability of the carrier, which is driven largely by how viable they are based on their profit and loss sheet.
Yeah, and what you're describing there, I think, is something, I've heard a lot, and it's something that I kind of stand by as well, is freight moves for what somebody's willing to take it for, like at the end of the day, right? And what you're describing there is like if there's an individual who can take a load for $1.40 or $1.50 a mile, they might still be making a small profit, albeit but a profit. And then it repositions them back into the market where their core customers are and stuff like that. So it's like, again, I think like, just for some basic numbers for people to put it into context, I believe it's like, is it 95% of the trucks on the road, 20 truck or less operations?
Correct.
95%, maybe even 96%, 97, I believe.
Yep.
And it's like, if you think about that though, like in comparison to the freight that you're moving, and then Dean is describing the vast operating costs that are out there. You have a majority of those fleets that are out there that have paid off or extremely low debt ratios out there. And then you have another group of individuals who bought at peak. They were a company driver in 2020. They said, boom, I'm going to go out on my own in 2021 and buy a truck and trailer. They bought a $100,000 truck for $200,000. And anybody who had saw that, they saw the sharp increases in pricing. So those operating costs are vastly different. So it's like, I look at it like, I think in its simplest form though, Dean, like this is how a free market will always operate.
Right. But the thing is, when I say if it's $1.80 to break even, the reality is for those carriers, and this is where the market's a race to a bottom, you really need like something like $2.20 to be profitable long term.
Yeah.
And this is the economic reality, because if you're not making 40 cents a mile on top of your break even, you haven't got the money for an in-frame rebuild.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years down the track, right? Because a good friend of mine just had an engine go. His X15 went on his Peterbilt. He's had to refinance $70,000 because it was $40,000 for the motor. Then he had the towing costs and a whole heap of other stuff went. And now he's into this truck for like $70,000 on top. You always had it paid off, Chris. Like, so, and this is the sort of stuff that breaks. I got another guy that's got like this big truck with a big motorhome type sleeper on it. And he's broke. And he doesn't know what to do because he hasn't been getting a return on the capital that the truck's been generating. Like the economics of running a truck is so hard. And so when it comes to these numbers we're talking about, it's extraordinary how generally carriers don't think about the business of running a truck. Like it's not about the rate per mile. They focus too much on that, not the revenue per truck day. And this is where the time factor comes in. Because if I was running a truck, I would say to you, Chris, as a logistician, I need $1,200 a day. I don't care how you get it. Give me $1,200 a day. Like it's not a rate per mile question. I got to run 600 miles at $2 a mile.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's it. And because if the rate per mile doesn't give me 600 miles, I'm behind.
Yeah.
You see
I get it, Dean. And I look at it as like all like what you said earlier too. It's all math at the end of the day. Exactly. And I know that, the lessons that I've learned in being self-employed, like balancing a budget, because it's like, if you're not generating enough revenue for your business and then your expenses go out and it's like, this is why I tell people the most important thing you can do as an entrepreneur. And if you're an owner operator, you are an entrepreneur. You have to work with a bookkeeper. You have to work with somebody to help you keep your cash flow or have send you a P&L, profit and loss statement. You need to see and track your expenses because I think a lot of individuals assume that everybody operates this way. And I'm actually alarmed at the amount of people that I know that own businesses that don't have a P&L. Like they don't. They operate on, I made 1,000 and that's all I know. And I think that's like the big thing here is like when everything boils down to it, everything's a system. All right. You need to build a system and follow a system in your business. And if you don't have any back office support at all, and you're an owner operator, you're not tracking your expenses, you don't know what your fuel bill is, or even if you're a broker, again, people assume you don't know what your technology spend is every month. Like I am literally going through my P&L, Dean, with a fine-tooth comb every single month. Yep. What are we spending our money on? Did we use this piece of equipment this month or not? Can we get rid of it? Can we sell it? What do we actually need? Because like this isn't like a game to me, like I've come to realize that I have my break-even point. I know what that is. I have my profit where I can pay myself to be able to do that because, like, again, I can't work for free. I got a family to feed. And then on top of that, there's money that comes in that I have to stash for a rainy day fund. On top of that, in the event, hey, I have a drop in revenue for a couple of months for whatever reason, I need to be able to continue to pay my bills and operate. And I think like a lot of people hear this and they say it's not that simple, but it is. It is that simple to start tracking your expenses. Find out what your break-even point. Every business has that number, what their break-even is, a 10% profit, 20% profit. They need to see what they're spending money on. And again, I was alarmed when I started going through it. And I'm like, I'm spending how much on what? And it's not the one-time purchase, Dean. It's the $10, $50 a month subscriptions that you're paying for that you don't even realize and you forget.
Right. Well, imagine a lot of truck companies come into the business without a good business plan or a good understanding. Little things like not amortizing your fixed expenses over or your finance costs over 10 months instead of 12. Mm-hmm. That's a really easy way to give yourself that 2-month buffer. Like you accrue your expenses over 10 months instead of 12. But here's what most people do wrong, I think, in trucking is they don't get the return on capital employed into the rate per mile. Like, so if you've got 50 grand down on a truck, that 50 grand has to be giving you a return on capital from the rate per mile equation that equivalent to what it would get in the bank. So if it's giving you 3% in the bank and that's equivalent of 2 cents a mile, it has to be giving you at least 2 cents a mile. Otherwise, you may as well keep it in the bank, right? So that 50 grand will be eroded over time. And I think that's where a lot of carriers come unstuck is you're not getting a return on that 50 grand that's in the truck. And what happens is you end up trading down over time. I've done it. I did it in Australia. I made this fatal mistake because over 5 years, I ended up with the inability to have enough capital in my business appreciating to the point where I could buy a new Kenworth. Ended up having to buy a used truck. I think that's what carriers do. Your advice was very sound because you've got to get good at being in the business of being in business, not a truck driver. And a lot of carriers don't know their costs. And then that means they don't know how to talk to you with the bid strategy. Like if you don't know your costs, how do I know how to negotiate? Where do I start? And I kind of accept anything just to keep the wheels moving. And that's it's a false strategy.
Yeah, no, it really is. I feel like it's just a guess at that point. And again, everybody starts somewhere, but you got to learn at some point, right? And because there are companies out there
that have lots and lots of money to burn in times like this. They spend more on coffee in a month than some people make in a year, and stuff like that. And that's really what you're competing with out there. But again, I look at it is if one company can do it, another company can do it. And I guarantee, and I say this often, and I need to say it again, I would love to have owner operators come on this show and talk about what they're doing, like what makes them successful, so we can put that information out there. But again, like, we can sit there and talk about knowing your costs, putting together a P&L all day in and day out. And then unfortunately, there's going to be people who are think, oh, that's not the case. These people are just ripping us all off. And that's just not it. Again, in its simplest form, I feel like the freight market will always be driven by supply and demand. And then ultimately, Dean, which you were talking about, there are carriers out there who can run for significantly cheaper than others at certain times, and they will get the freight, right? Like, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I always looked at freight brokers as my best friend, like, because you have access to a market I know nothing about. Like, I don't understand the animosity, and I've always taken it as, like, sometimes when I go into a market I know nothing about, I'm happy to pay for that, because time is money. Like, so that's where the 13 to 15% I'm going to pay you, I could quickly recover that cost by turning and burning. Like, if I lose a day, if I'm looking for $1,500 per truck day, I can't afford, like, if I'm going to pay you $150 on a load, I can't afford to lose $1,500 revenue per day, because it's not the $1,500 revenue I lose. It's the fact I'm out of sequence for my next contract load in the other city.
Yeah.
So it's the sequencing. And that's why I think that's where a lot of carriers get hung up on this. So I think you know, the service that brokers provide is an invaluable service, because the actual cost to do that marketing itself is far more than the brokerage fee itself. But I think I want to make one more point before we wrap up here, because I think if you can survive these times and control your costs, I think it sets you up for what's about to come next year, because these are, I think, Chris, the worst of times in the freight market. This is like the bottom of the bottom. And I think that's where cost control is absolutely critical.
No, I agree, Dean. And I think, like, ultimately at the end of the day, this is where, this is that time. And I've been saying this for a few years now, but, like, this is that time where you need to start approaching your business, get that back office organized, hire a bookkeeper, whatever it is you do, factoring company, whatever, do something to where they can look at it and be like, hey, you are generating hypothetically $10,000 a month. You're spending $11,000 a month. Here are some things that you're paying for that it looks like you are not actively using. And I feel like you can start uncovering some profitability very quickly that way. And again, I've done it, you guys. All right. I don't own a truck, right? So you could sit here and be like, oh, you just pay for software for your show. And that's true, right? That is. But again, I paid for stuff that I wasn't using. And it's those small fees that you don't think about that pop up on your credit card that are $80 or $40, and you don't notice them because you're spending $1,200 on fuel every 3 days, right? So it's like those get buried down there, but it's those little expenses that add up quick.
Or food in truck stops instead of cooking your own food. Like, I'd imagine if you looked at the amount of food you spend in truck stops on a 34-hour reset, or God forbid, like on a long weekend, like, I think that would be a huge expense for a lot of carriers, is their food expense. And I'm sure a lot of people don't track that, but I think that's probably where there's a big black hole.
Dude, as somebody who makes all of their own food and brings it to work every single day, Dean, I can tell you exactly how much money you save out there to go out. But Dean, thank you so much for your time today. How does anybody reach out to you? Any drivers, or who's like, Dean, I like what you're saying. Can I just, like, pick your brain here?
Yep. LinkedIn. So Dean Croke at LinkedIn. If you want any data, our IQ shows 10 a.m. Eastern on YouTube, DAT Freight and Analytics, every Tuesday. If you got any data questions, ask IQ@dat.com.
Perfect. I appreciate it, Dean. If you guys can't find any of that, hit me up. I will gladly put you guys in contact with Dean and my friends over at DAT. But that's going to be it for today, ladies and gentlemen. As always, if you got value in what you heard and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. And if you're feeling ambitious after this one, which you should be, rank the show on iTunes and Spotify, because if you see value, your network's going to see it as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And we'll be talking to you soon.
Came back with a bang. Window down, yelling out money, anything. Ayy, ooh, got the foot on the gas. Pedal to the metal when I'm when the lane